A damn fine cup of coffee.
Welcome on in to Monsters After Midnight. Episode 2. It came from the sky. Tonight on Monsters After Midnight, we are exploring humanoids from the sky. And we're going to start off with one of the most infamous North American cryptids that flies, and that is the Jersey Devil. The Jersey Devil is a hideous monster. And before we get to how hideous it is, we need to go over its vital statistics. Distinguishing features of the beast: leathery wings, cloven hooves, horns, and an eerie aura. Height about 3'6", weight 70 pounds. Range and habitat: New Jersey Pine Barrens. Many a folk have gone missing in those barrens, I'll tell you what. Population size 1 of 1. Diet carnivore. Behavior: the Jersey Devil is found kidnapping children and travelers who stray too close to its home in the Jersey Pine Barrens. It's also known to mutilate livestock and invades homes in search of human prey. The source of these stories: American folklore and cryptozoology. Now, encountering one of these beasts is rated 4 Jersey Devils out of 5. So if you're in the Pine Barrens, beware, for the Jersey Devil might have machinations for you. The Jersey Devil is a hideous monster with the lithe body, cloven hooves, and a thin neck. On top of this slender neck sways a horrible head that combines the ugliest attributes of 3 domestic animals. Like a horse, the monster flares large round nostrils and has a broad yellow teeth. 2 goat-like horns shoot from the creature's forehead just above its twitching ears. From its dark gums and curled lips, the monster drools like a mangy dog. To take flight, the Jersey Devil unfurls a pair of leathery wings which cover a span of 2 feet. It travels through the night, its body sheathed in a yellow glow. The monster is also known for its mournful cry. The Jersey Devil inhabits the Pine Barrens of New Jersey, a thinly populated area largely subject to isolation and poverty. Throughout the Pine Barrens, or the Pineys, as the Jersey Devil locals call it, the devil hunts possums, rabbits, and fish. Occasionally, the monster wanders into surrounding countryside where it mutilates sheep and the cattle. The Jersey Devil is also known for its daring chimney raids, which were first reported in the 1780s. During such assaults, the monster slips down a chimney and creates havoc within a home by destroying furniture, emptying the pantry, chasing pets, and terrorizing the inhabitants to near insanity. In the most memorable of these raids, the Jersey Devil pulls children from their beds, drags screaming victims up the chimney, and spirits them away, presumably to devour them at its leisure. A guaranteed defense against chimney raids has yet to be discovered, as closed flues, wire barriers, and even flames in the fireplace have failed to stop the monster's descent. Can nothing stop the Jersey Devil? In addition to aggressively attacking people living near the Pine Barrens, the Jersey Devil assaults anyone who enters its habitat. There are numerous reports of teenagers, hunters, and explorers venturing into the New Jersey forests only to be threatened by the monster. Some disappear altogether. The creature frequently manifests near roads leading into the secluded terrain in order to frighten away potential invaders. Cars parked in the Pine Barrens have had their roofs ripped away and their passengers stolen into the night. Locals on the fringes of the Pine Barrens have long reported eerie shrieks and ominous screams coming from the backwoods, sounds that are harbingers of doom. Aside from its ability to fly and its great strength, the Jersey Devil possesses many other powers. It can become invisible at will, giving itself access to even the most heavily guarded livestock or homes. Its fetid breath can curdle milk. It can make cheese on command and kill off any fish in a lake. The creature is surrounded by an evil aura that causes bad fortune to befall witnesses and is also capable of spitting fire from its black mouth. Now, the history of New Jersey's most gruesome resident begins on the outskirts of the Pine Barrens on a winter night in 1735, when the mistress of a British soldier, a woman known as Mother Leeds, went into labor with her 13th child. Mother Leeds had delivered her 12 previous children without a single complication. But from the onset of this unlucky labor, she suffered agonizing pain. In a moment of anguish, she cursed her 13th child and wished it out of her body. As the hateful words faded from her lips, the infant slithered from her womb. Thus the Jersey Devil was born. Upon seeing the baby, the midwife attendant screamed and died of shock. The devil's father rushed into the room with his musket raised, but when he looked upon the creature, he fled from the house and was never to be seen again. Throughout her haze of pain, Mother Leeds sat up to behold the child, and her mind completely snapped at the sight of her horrific offspring. For a moment, the creature stood motionless, but when it heard one of its siblings wailing in the next room, it bolted toward the sound. With each step, the Jersey Devil's cloven hooves burned a bizarre footprint into the wooden floorboards. Mother Leeds followed the beast into the next room and watched it pluck its tearful brother from its cradle, open its jaws wide, and swallow the child whole. The newborn monster then killed and consumed the remaining 11 children. With its ghastly red eyes, it looked upon Mother Leeds one last time and disappeared up the chimney. The fate of Mother Leeds has been lost through history, and it is likely that she either died shortly after the incident or spent the rest of her days in an asylum. The tale of her demonic child, however, continues well into the present. The monster that sprang from Mother Leeds was originally known as the Leeds Devil, but it soon became more generally known as the Jersey Devil, due to its preference for the swamps and woods of southern New Jersey. In the decades following its birth, the monster spent much of its time rustling bushes, casting strange shadows through windows, tangling clotheslines, and hovering over solitary travelers. While its clothing footprints were often mistaken for that of those of Satan, and they were discovered in snowdrifts, fields, and forest paths, the creature itself was rarely encountered. Still, enough witnesses had come forward by 1740 that a priest decided to bless the Pine Barrens to prevent the monster from continuing to haunt the area. He placed a powerful spell over the habitat, meant to keep the Jersey Devil from returning to the Pine Barrens for at least 100 years. The spell largely failed, as the creature reappeared later that same year. As it do. Party on with the Jersey Devil. Can you imagine? You're living in the Jersey Pine Barrens and a Jersey Devil flies down your chimney. Gosh. Wouldn't that just be a scary thing to happen? Anywho, look at this. Coming up, we have these guys telling us the Jersey Devil's the hoax, but that's just what they want you to think. Am I right? I'm right. In 1800, Commodore Stephen Decatur was testing cannons in Hanover ironwork when the Jersey Devil made a dramatic appearance. Decatur fired a cannonball toward the flying monstrosity, but watched in horror as the metal ball merely passed through the Jersey Devil's body. Many such cases. From 1816 to 1839, the Jersey Devil was also reported by Joseph Bonaparte, Napoleon's brother, and the former King of Spain, who spent many years around the Pine Barrens. In the 1830s and 1840s, the Jersey Devil left the Pine Barrens for a brief forays into Virginia, where it began hunting livestock, mutilating and gorging on many as a dozen cattle in one night. On one outing, it killed 2 dogs, 3 geese, 4 cats, and 31 ducks. Then tried to snatch several curious children as well. From the mid-1800s to the early 20th century, the beast was content to remain deep within the Pine Barrens. In 1909, however, it became tired of hiding and launched a much-publicized rampage. Between January 16th and January 23rd, the monster openly canvassed New Jersey and neighboring states, generating over 1,000 confirmed sightings. Hordes of people also discovered the devil's unique footprints on rooftops, along roads, and even inside their homes. Further evidence of the monster's presence was included in destroyed chicken coops and mutilated remains of dogs, cats, and livestock. The Jersey Devil's actions were so terrifying that schools in the area closed. Hell yeah, those kids were so stoked. Imagine instead of a snow day, you get a Jersey Devil day. Sorry kids, school's closed because there's a fucking flying monster around. And children were kept behind locked doors. But after a 7-day spree, the Devil's rampage inexplicably ended and it disappeared once again into the Pineys. Just like with creatures like the Mad Gasser. They go on a rampage and then poof, they gone. Throughout the next 50 years, more chilling encounters kept the Jersey Devil's reputation alive. In 1927, the beast boldly leapt onto the hood of a taxicab, squawked furiously, and then lifted up into the night sky again. Near Errol, New Jersey in the late 1930s, a pair of men watched as the Jersey Devil used its powerful wings to lop off the tops of several trees. Soon afterwards, 2 young girls claimed that they had barely escaped a growling creature. On November 22nd, 1951, the Jersey Devil cornered several children at the DuPont Clubhouse in Gibbston. It inexplicably left without claiming a victim. However, according to one witness, the brute's face was covered in fresh blood, indicating that others had met their doom earlier that day within the monster's maw. After fleeing the clubhouse, the monster besieged other areas of Gibbstown. It was ultimately spotted by several hundred people, most between the ages of 13 and 32. The Jersey Devil faded from sight in the 1960s, but throughout the 1970s, it became the bane of campers visiting the Pine Barrens. At night, they were uniformly tormented by terrible screams and endless shrieks. The monster also rustled bushes, stole tents, and doused campfires until its victims fled in terror. Such activity has continued unabated into the present. I will tell you, I live out in the woods, and every time I fucking go out at night with my puppies, it seems like there are people screaming into the woods. No, actually not. It's mainly in the weekends, and that's when like people have their Airbnb, so it makes sense. They're just screaming. They're having such a good time in the woods. They're screaming their asses off, you know? Which is to be expected, and I appreciate it. Just don't leave your litter, okay? Pick up your shit. That's all. But the Jersey Devil shrieking into the night, that would be terrifying. Very rarely, when it's late at night and I'm walking my dogs, do I hear a scream in the night. that actually sounds like it might be serious, very rarely. But there's no way to know where it comes from. It's just, I feel like that's just what it's like living out in the woods. Every now and then you hear like a scream and you're like, huh, okay. For a while I thought there was this winged monstrosity after me, but I figured out it was just these interesting doves that live in a tree by our house. And I think they're there all year. I got to look up and see what kind of birds they are. But at night I'd hear the crazy flapping of these wings, but I wouldn't be able to see what it was. And you typically, birds don't fly around at night, or at least from my experience out here. So it was very scary. But then I figured out it was these cool like dove-like birds that live in a tree by us. I got to figure out what kind of birds they are. Maybe they're like cool rare birds. But speaking of rare birds, let's get back to the sightings of the Jersey Devil. So again, it goes out of, you know, people don't really see it much in the 70s and afterwards. It's the bane of some campers. It kind of fades from existence until the 90s, when the most recent recorded sighting of the monster occurred in December of 1993. And there probably has been more sightings since. This book was published before the year 2000, I believe. Forest Ranger John Irwin was driving alongside the Mullica River in southern New Jersey when he found the road blocked by the creature. Irwin described the monster as a 6-foot-tall bipedal animal with horns and matted black fur. The ranger and the Jersey Devil stared at each other for several minutes, but the monster opted to disappear into the forest rather than attack. Unlike other North American monsters, the Jersey Devil has not been the subject of a massive expedition, nor have local residents instigated or organized searches for the fearsome beast. P.T. Barnum and others have exhibited quote-unquote Jersey Devils, but these have proved to be fakes. Basically, they took carcasses and sewed shit on them, make them look like Jersey Devils, make them look like hybrids. This is what you find a lot if anyone's trying to tell you that they have a mermaid carcass. It's most likely something fake, like just creative taxidermy, as we like to call it in the business. If you're the type of cryptid hunter that wants to go out there and find the creature, just be cautious. It's got a lot of powers. Chances are you're going to run into it if you got the right aura, if you got the right heart, or if it's looking for you. So just be careful. The Jersey Devil is out there. Next up, we go from the Jersey Devil to the history of flying humanoids. Getting ready for our cherry on top. Ooh, not yet. Not Mothman, not yet. Ooh, not yet. First, we have to learn about other flying humanoids. And to do that, we're going to pick up Unexplained here by Jerome Clark. We just finished, from one of my favorites, The Field Guide to North American Monsters. If you're looking for a great little coffee table book that's going to get you ready for all the beasts you're going to run into in the backwoods of America, this is for you. That was the Jersey Devil. Good stuff. Next, we're going to dive into Unexplained by Jerome Clark, and he's going to get into flying humanoids. Now, I had never really heard of any of these encounters until I read this book, so buckle up. They're a little spooky. Flying humanoids scare the shit out of me. I don't know. It's just something odd about like a human figure that's just flying towards you very slowly. It's not, I don't know. Something about it. And you're about to shit yourself because this stuff has happened a lot, all right? It's not just a couple loons that have had this experience. This is, centuries, many people. When a mysterious object passed over Mount Vernon, Illinois on the evening of April 14th, 1897, 100 citizens, including Mayor B.C. Wells, saw something that, as press accounts had it, resembled the body of a huge man swimming through the air with an electric light on his back. A huge man swims through the air. Reports of flying beings of humans, or generally human appearance, are among the rarer anomalous phenomena, but they occur periodically. A winged human form was observed over Brooklyn on September 18th, 1877. According to W.H. Smith in the New York Sun on September 21st, almost exactly 3 years later, on the New York Times on September 12, 1880, they remarked on reports from Coney Island of a man with bat's wings and improvised frog's legs, at least 1,000 feet in the air, flying towards the New Jersey coast, with a cruel and determined expression. In a 1947 book, the Russian writer V.K. Arsenev recounted this July 11th, 1908 experience in the Silk Mountains near Vladivostok in the far eastern region of what would be the USSR. The rain stopped, the temperature of the air remained low, and the mist appeared over the water. It was then that I saw the mark on the path that was very similar to a man's footprint. My dog, Alpha, bristled up, snarled, and then something rushed about nearby, trampling among the bushes. However, it didn't go away, but stopped nearby, standing stock still. We had been standing like that for some minutes. Then I stopped, picked up a stone, and threw it towards the unknown animal. Then something happened that was quite unexpected. I heard a beating of wings. Something large and dark emerged from the fog and flew over the river. A moment later, it disappeared in the dense mist. My dog, badly frightened, pressed itself to my feet. After supper, I told the Udi men about this incident, and they broke into a vivid story about a man who could fly in the air. Hunters often saw the tracks that appeared and suddenly vanished, suddenly in such a way that they could only be possible if the quote-unquote man flew off the ground and then took off again into the air. More flying humanoids encountered by children in New Mexico. 4 Silver City, New Mexico children playing in a yard at twilight in a summer day in 1938 witnessed a bizarre sight, as one of the observers recalled it in 1980. We all saw him. He was dressed all in gray, and he even seemed gray. He was drifting or floating at treetop level. The thing I remember the most about him was that he seemed to be wearing a belt which was wide and had points sticking out of it. He also seemed to be wearing a cap, a la Flash Gordon. He drifted across the sky above us, and we all stood and stared speechless. It did not occur to us to question this phenomena. As children, we accepted it. About 15 years ago, I was telling my husband about it. When I did, I questioned myself. Perhaps I had had a dream. But just in case, I called my brother. By now, I was about 35, and he was about 32. I prefaced the conversation by telling him that I had a strange story to tell, and that perhaps that had all been a dream, but that I thought that in about 1938, I had seen a man fly over our heads. He stopped me and said, "It wasn't a dream." He went on to describe everything as I had described it here, including the belt and the cape. From New Mexico, we go to a soldier stationed in Japan in 1952. One night in 1953, U.S. Air Force Private Sinclair Taylor, on guard duty in Camp Ukubu, Kyoto, Japan, said he heard a loud flapping noise. Looking up, he saw an enormous quote-unquote bird in the moonlight. When it approached, he got frightened and put a round into the chamber of his carbine. The bird now had stopped its flight and was hovering not far away, staring at the soldier. The thing, which now had slowly started to descend again, had the body of a man, Taylor recalled. It was well over 7 feet from head to feet, and its wingspan was almost equal to its height. I started to fire and emptied my carbine where the thing hit the ground. But when I looked up to see if my bullets had found a home, there was nothing there. When the sergeant of the guard came to investigate and heard the story, he told Taylor that he believed him because earlier another guard had seen the same thing. An even more disturbing incident allegedly occurred in Falls City, Nebraska, one fall after noon in 1956. The Hanks family, a pseudonym of course, because they encountered something so fucking terrifying that if you knew their real name, you go try and find them and talk to them, then they'd have to disappear. Just like the Vegas encounter people did, and just like the people who encounter the Hopkinsonville goblins did. So no, you don't get to know who they are. You get a fake name, because that's how we treat people who have extraordinary encounters. Nebraska family, let's party. Falls City, Nebraska, the Hanks family, a pseudonym of course, so we don't bother them, had just returned from an outing, and all but John, the husband/father, had gone into the house. John Hanks was loading work equipment into the back of his pickup when a casual glance caught something in the air 3 blocks away. As it got closer, what Hanks had first taken as a kite began to look more like something unimaginable, a large winged human form. Soon, he could see its very frightening, almost demonic face. Years later, speaking with investigator Ray Boach, he remembered its eyes, very large and blue in color. They were shaped on its face almost like a horse's eyes. The skin on his face was a tan leather. It was very wrinkled and seemed to overlap in folds. I had a good look at its face. He was only about 25 feet away and hovering maybe 15 feet above the ground. He was between 8 and 9 feet tall. At that point, the figure wobbled and plummeted to the ground, stopping just before it hit the pavement. It resumed its flight towards Hanks, who wanted to flee but was paralyzed. As it flew over him, he could see that the wings were stretched about 15 feet from tip to tip, 2 feet wide at the closest points to the body and 3 feet wide with the outer extremities. They resembled polished aluminum with grids on their upper surfaces. 4 or 5 inch colored lights moving outward from the blue to yellow to orange to red at the tip ran along each underside. The wing, according to Hanks, was fastened to him by a shoulder harness which seemed to have a breastplate of some sort with dials on it. He seemed to touch and move these dials, but his hands, if that's what they were, looked more like a white dove's wings all opened up. A hissing sound came from the back of the wings. Only after the figure had vanished behind trees about 2 blocks away did Hanks recover his mobility. But it took him much longer than that to regain his peace of mind. For the next 2 decades, he suffered terrifying nightmares concerning the flying beast. And its image haunted him even during his waking hours. In the late 70s, through a conscious act of will, he finally succeeded in putting the memory behind him. In the mid-80s, he told the reporter Botch, "It doesn't matter anymore." Another flying humanoid came to ufologist Dan Worley from Earl Morrison, who served the 1st Marine Division in Vietnam. While stationed near Da Nang in August 1969, he and 2 other guards reportedly saw an extraordinary sight just after 1 o'clock in the morning. They were sitting atop a bunker and talking when they noticed something approaching them from the sky. Morrison told Worley, "We saw what looked like wings, like a bat's, only it was a gigantic compared to what a regular bat would be. After it got close enough so we could see what it looked like a woman, a naked woman. She was all dark. Her skin was dark. Her body was dark. Her wings were dark. Everything was dark, but it glowed. It glowed in the night, kind of a greenish cast to it. She started going over us, and we still didn't hear anything. She was right above us. And when she got over the top of our heads, she was maybe 6 or 7 feet up. We watched her go straight over the top of us, and still she didn't make any noise. Flapping her wings, she blotted out the moon once. That's how close she was to us. And dark, like pitch black. But we could still define her because she glowed real bright like. And she started going past us straight towards our encampment. As we watched her, she had gone about 10 feet or so away from us. We started hearing her wings flap, and it sounded, like regular wings flapping. And she just started flying off, and we watched her for quite a while. Morrison thought the covering on her skin was more like fur than feathers. The skin of her wings looked like it was molded to her hands, like a bat's, he said. And the movement of her arms suggested they had no bones in them. Jelly arms. So there we have it, folks. A history of flying humanoids. Also, let it be known, Jersey has a history of strange shit in its skies. From the drones now that everyone's freaking out about, to the old Jersey Devil back in the day. And then we fast forward to it not being an American phenomena at all. Around the world, people have experienced flying humanoids. It doesn't get into it here. It might get into it in our next spot. But even in the old jolly old England, they had encounters with a Mothman-like creature. So from flying humanoids from around the world and through time, from the fucking 18th century into the 20th century, we now go to the most infamous of all creatures, monsters to come from the sky and terrify, and that is the Mothman. Now, not only are we traveling to Mothman country, I wouldn't bring you to Mothman country if I wasn't bringing you an expert. Come on now. We are traveling to Mothman country with the granddaddy, the papa dog, the king, and my king, our king, one of the kings of the weird, and that is John A. Keel. Is this the Mothman prophecies? No. That's for a different night, and we'll read it all the way through, and we'll read it together, and it'll be beautiful. This comes from a short section from Strange Creatures from Time and Space, written by John A. Keel. If you're unfamiliar, John A. Keel is the granddaddy of Mothman research. The reason Mothman is popular is because of John A. Keel. The reason a lot of unheard voices were heard from the 60s is because of John A. Keel. He believed the unbelievable. If you had an encounter with the unknown back in the day, you called Keel. He showed up. He believed you. And then you maybe had more encounters. He's also great because he's one of the first researchers in the West, and other people have done this for centuries in other cultures, to tie together beasts and creatures of the unknown with ghost sightings, lights in the sky, interdimensional shit. All the stuff we like to read about on the Sunrise Book Club. So that's what we're doing. We are stopping. We are ending our night with the granddaddy of creatures that came from the sky, and that is the Mothman. 5 men were digging a grave in a cemetery near Clinton, West Virginia on November 12, 1966, when something that looked like a brown human being fluttered from some nearby trees and maneuvered low over their heads. It was gliding through the trees, witness Kenneth Duncan of Blue Creek said, and was in the sight for about a minute. The men were baffled. It did not look like any kind of bird, but it seemed to be a man with wings. They discussed it with a few friends and would have forgotten about it if others in West Virginia had not also started seeing the enigmatic flyer. About a year earlier, a woman living on the Ohio River, some miles from Clinton, was amused when her 7-year-old son ran into the house one day and excitedly told her that he had seen a quote-unquote angel, a man with wings. She assumed it was just his imagination and thought no more about it. Then in the summer of 1966, another woman in the Ohio Valley, the wife of a doctor who was in her backyard, when a 6-foot-long thing soared past her very rapidly. She thought it resembled a giant butterfly, and she dared to mention the incident to only a few people. But all these random anomalous events were only the prologue to the monster mania, which would grip the whole western edge of West Virginia in November of 1966. This next sighting of Mothman is one of the most infamous, and it takes us to the TNT area outside of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Mr. and Mrs. Roger Scarberry and Mr. and Mrs. Steve Millett were driving through an abandoned World War II ammunition dump known as the TNT area, 7 miles outside of Point Pleasant, West Virginia. When as they passed an old deserted power plant, they saw a weird figure standing beside the road staring at them. It was shaped like a man but bigger. Roger Scarberry later said, maybe 6.5 or 7 feet tall, and it had big wings folded against its back. But it was those eyes that got us, Linda Scarberry declared with a shudder. Roger slammed on the gas of his souped-up jalopy and headed out of the TNT area for Route 62, which leads into Point Pleasant. As they shot down the highway, we are going better than 100 miles per hour, Roger claimed. His wife cried out, "It's following us!" All four swore that the quote-unquote bird was low overhead and its wings spread out about 10 feet. It seemed to keep up with the car effortlessly, even though its wings were not flapping. I could hear it making a sound, Mrs. Millett said. It squeaked like a big mouse. It followed us right to the city limits, Roger went on. Funny thing is, we noticed a dead dog by the side of the road, but when we came back a few minutes later, the dog was gone. And those in the know that another one of the first reported sightings, not the grave diggers, but after that, a man who lived alone, eating his beans, taking care of his dogs. One of his dogs ran out when he had an encounter with the Mothman. He never saw it again. Then this couple, the panic-stricken quartet, drove directly to the office of the Mason County Sheriff and excitedly poured out their story to Deputy Millard Halstead. "I've known them all their lives," Halstead told us during our first visit to Point Pleasant. "They've never been any trouble, and I took them seriously." Deputy Halstead returned to the TNT area with them. Good deputy. Not all sheriffs do this. Now, we always read about sheriffs who encounter people who encounter the strange. Some just scoff. A very rare few believe, like old Deputy Halstead here. They went back to the TNT area the next day, and they didn't really find anything. News of the Scarberry Millett sighting was flashed around the world. It even appeared in the Pacific edition of Stars and Stripes. Television camera crews from Huntington and Charleston invaded Point Pleasant, and at night, the normally deserted TNT area resembled Times Square on New Year's Eve. But Steve Millett announced, "I've seen it once, and I hope to never see it again." Now, the next sighting of the Mothman brings me to one of my favorite theories of monsters after midnight, and that is lights in the sky, creature running by. Meet the Mothman encounter that fits the description. 9 p.m. Wednesday, November 16th, 1966. Mr. and Mrs. Raymond Walmsley and Mr. Marcella Bennett, and Mrs. Marcella Bennett, and her baby daughter Tina drove out to visit the Thomases. On our way to the house, we were watching a funny big red lights in the sky, Mrs. Bennett recalled. It seemed to be moving around and over the TNT area. It wasn't an airplane, but we couldn't figure out what it was. Most of the crowds of would-be monster hunters had converged around the old power plant, some distance from the Thomas home. When Raymond Walmsley drove up to the house, he decided he would play a prank on his friends by tapping surreptitiously on the window. He never had a chance to play his joke. They parked in front of the Thomas house, and Mrs. Bennett climbed out of the car, gathering up her sleepy 2-year-old in her arms, and suddenly a figure stirred behind the parked car. It seemed as if it had been lying down, Mrs. Bennett told us. It rose up slowly from the ground, a big gray thing, bigger than a man with a terrible glowing red eyes. Mrs. Bennett was so horrified she dropped little Tina. "Oh no!" to the ground and collapsed, transfixed. It was as if the thing had her in some kind of trance. Trope of the unknown. You're going to get paralyzed or put in a trance. Mrs. Walmsley said she couldn't move. Panic engulfed the group. The Walmsleys ran for the house, and Mrs. Bennett pulled herself together, grabbed up her child, and followed. They locked themselves in, and Ralph and Virginia Thomas were not at home, but 3 of the children, Ricky, Connie, and Vicky, were. Hysteria swept over them as the strange creeper shuffled onto the porch and peered into the windows. Raymond Walmsley grabbed the phone and called the police. By the time help arrived, the thing had disappeared once more. Mrs. Bennett would not recover fully from the terrifying experience for many months, and more months passed before she was able to discuss what she had seen with anyone, even her own family. Her trauma was so real that she had to start seeing a doctor on a weekly basis. She was plagued by frightening dreams and believed the monster repeatedly visited her home, a small house somewhat isolated on the outskirts of Point Pleasant. And if at this point you're like, hey, you know what? Oh, it sounds like the Mothman only came in the 60s. Let me tell you of something great to watch. Check out Netflix, Unsolved Mysteries. The more recent seasons, they have an episode on Mothman. Motherfuckers are still seeing the Mothman today as it was back then. Okay? That's all I'm saying. So like the man, Mr. Hanks, who saw the being flying towards him, Mrs. Bennett, after her experience, is traumatized. For years, she ain't right after encountering the Mothman. But the wild thing about this creature out in Point Pleasant, Virginia, is in that area between 1959 and 1966, there's all sorts of strange sightings. We have sightings in 59, then in 60, then in 67. Then in 1966, we have 2 sightings. One on November 25th, and then one on November 27th. Basically the same thing. Both people report seeing a light in the sky. Then later, they're just driving. And they see this big creature on the side of the road. One of them gets chased. The other just kind of gets a bah, bah. So again, right now we're up to about 5 sightings. And dozens more happened in the same area. The sightings of Mothman continued from 1959 until about 1968. Also, there is a Silver Bridge collapse that is connected with the creature. Many believe that Mothman appeared as a warning to what was going to happen. Then the Silver Bridge collapse in 67. Mothman sightings taper off, but there still are some in 68, and even now there are modern day sightings. John A. Keel, when he was out there, he met a family who was having several Mothman sightings, and also their house was having crazy poltergeist encounters, and they were seeing UFOs in the sky. While John A. Keel was out in Point Pleasant, he was also visited by the Men in Black, people who encouraged him to stop researching what he was researching. So Mothman, what do we have? An interdimensional being? A programmed life form? Something that was dropped off by extraterrestrials? Who the fuck knows? But are flying humanoids? And did it come from the sky? Absolutely. Are these things real? Yes. Can they get you? Yeah. Should you be worried? I don't know. But thank you for joining me for Monsters After Midnight. Tonight we learned about the Jersey Devil. Careful out there in the Pine Barrens. Other encounters with flying humanoids. Careful out there anywhere. And then the Mothman. Be careful out there. I love you. Bye-bye.